everyone, and welcome to the 19th episode of Not Just Numbers, Honest Conversations with a Financial Advisor and Lawyer. I am Madison and I am here with Mike Gary. Mike is a financial advisor and a CFP and the founder and the CEO of Yardley Wealth Management. He is also an estate planning lawyer, and his law firm is Yardley Estate Planning. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Maddie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good,
Good,
good.
good. All right. So today we are talking about an article you wrote recently in the Yardley Living magazine.
Yep,
So, Yardley Living magazine is a local magazine that Mike is a part of. And I believe you wrote an article, was it titled, Don't Listen to Predictions, Do This Instead?
yep. Don't listen to the pundits, maybe.
Okay. What was the article about, Mike?
So, every year at this time in December and January, the press is filled with people who are experts in fields saying what they think is going to happen for the year, whether it's style or cooking or, clothes. But in the financial world, you get a lot of people out there saying what they think is going to happen with the stock market or interest rates. And at least in our field, those guesses are often wrong, sometimes horribly wrong. And I don't think it makes any sense to listen to those predictions. I think that there's checklists of what you can do in your financial life. And so in the article, I laid out a couple of things that make sure, like, hey, if you have these, make sure you have good answers for all these questions. And if you do, you'll be in pretty good shape. Whereas if you listen to pundits and say, like, I'm going to guess and buy stocks or sell stocks or redo loans or something based on what they think is going to happen with interest rates, well, you don't know if that'll work or not. Last year, because one of the issues in those predictions is there's a lot of something called recency bias. So since 2022 was a bad year for stocks, all their predictions predicted that 2023 would also be a bad year, and it wasn't. It was led a lot by the Magnificent Seven, and they had an outsized input on the S&P 500. But even without those, the market sort of had a good year anyway. But nobody predicted it because the year before was bad. And so now that this year was last year was a positive one, most of the predictions now are, oh, it's more of the positive. And well, it could be, the years are positive more often than they're negative, but we don't know. It's just a guess.
Okay. You wrote a post where you said instead of listening to the pundits make predictions, you should ask yourself a list of questions and see how comfortable you are with the answers. Would you like to go over that now?
Sure.
Okay. So, is my spending in line with my income, investments, and or pension and social security?
Sure. Hey, the big question for everybody, are you spending too much? And if you are, you have to look at ways that you could cut it and bring it back into line. Or if you're young and it's possible, can you earn more to make up for that? But you should have a sense, like every month, is your savings and checking accounts, are they going down a little bit? Are they going up a little bit? You should know. And so take a look at it and figure it out.
Okay. And it's a good time to start that, right? New year, new goals.
Yeah, everybody's motivated for the new year.
Yeah.
You know now you could figure out what all of your spending was in 2023, all of your income was, and see how they match up. If you're retired, is it an appropriate amount that you're taking from your accounts? Or if you have Social Security and pensions, or is your spending in line with what you're getting from those? If you're working, are you saving enough? Do you know how much you should be saving, and are you doing that? And getting the answers to these questions is much more important than whether you think the Dow is going to hit 36,000 or 29,000.
Okay. So if I'm using a credit card, am I doing it for the points and the convenience?
Yes. Are you using the credit card and taking advantage of it? Paying nothing for the card or a small amount if the perks are really worth it, and then just paying it off every month. Or do you keep a balance and you're paying the credit card companies 20 or 30% per year? Because if you're doing that, that is going to really throw a wrench into your financial plan. So, as part of the spending, if you're putting on a credit card because it's easy, you could tap it or tap your phone. It can be very convenient. And as long as you're paying the bill off and you're spending the right amount, that's totally fine. And then, you get perks and points for that. We get a lot of those now. It's a good thing. Just make sure that's why you're using the card, not because you can't afford to pay for something. And if you can't afford to pay for something, then that's a whole other issue. And then you have to look at the spending and what your options are. And I know that a lot of people in this country don't make enough, and spending is hard. It's not like an immoral thing. It's a financial thing. Can you afford it?
Okay. Do I have enough emergency cash and is it getting a decent interest rate?
Right. So everybody has emergencies come up. That some ball crashes through a window or your car doesn't start and you're going to need cash. And most Americans don't have access to enough cash. So figure out what your emergency cash should be. It's probably going to be some multiple of your monthly spending. And then make sure, that's separate from your checking account. And then make sure that's in a place that earns interest. Because right now, there are plenty of accounts that can earn 4 or 5%. We don't want to keep it in your generic Wells Fargo, Bank of America account and get a 0.5%. There's no reason for that.
Yeah. So, am I certain that I am taking the right steps to reduce my tax burden?
Yes. A lot of people file their tax return in March or April and don't think about taxes the rest of the year. And they're probably leaving a lot of money on the table. So, whether you do your own taxes or pay someone to do it, it doesn't matter. But you should be doing tax planning. You should be making sure during the rest of the year that you're doing the things that are right so that you minimize your tax burden, to the extent that you can. So ordinarily that means putting money in an IRA or your employer retirement account, selling stocks for losses, um, making the right choices with healthcare. There's all sorts of things, and you need to be planning, not just comply and fill it out and say, "Oh, it's done, and I got $200 back, so I'm good." Well, what if that could have been $2,000 back or $10,000 back? Um, Unfortunately, with taxes, all we're worried about, 90% of people are only worried about complying with it and not actually doing the planning. And planning is where you could really make some money.
Okay. Am I taking advantage of my employer match for my workplace retirement plan? And do I know whether I should be using the pre-tax or Roth option?
Yep. So most employer plans will have some sort of match. And if you're not putting in enough to get that full amount of match, you're missing out on free money, right? So if your employer will match all of your contributions up to 5% and you're only putting in 3%, that 2% of your salary that you could be saving, you could be getting added to your pay. It would be like a bonus or a raise that you just say like no thank you to. Now, I understand that cash flow is a hard thing for most Americans, but it's something that you should try to figure out. The other question, whether you should be doing the pre-tax or the Roth, most plans now, or a lot of plans now, do have a Roth option. And for some people, it clearly makes sense to do the pre-tax. If you're in the 37% bracket and you don't think you're going to be in that bracket in retirement, pre-tax probably makes sense. If you're really low income, the Roth probably makes sense because you're probably not paying any federal taxes. And in between that, it gets trickier. So if you're in the 22 or 24% marginal bracket, it's a toss-up whether the Roth or pre-tax is better. And I think it depends a lot on your personal circumstances and situation. But this is all something that you should think about and have an idea. If you're not sure, get advice from somebody, talk to people, and try to figure it out.
Okay. Is my portfolio diversified and do I have the right mix of stocks and or bonds for my situation and my comfort?
Right. So first thing is, what's the allocation that makes sense for me? You have some amount, some percentage in stocks, some percentage in bonds, and your portfolio may need a cash allocation too if you're taking withdrawals. So that allocation needs to be okay for you to handle the ups and downs of the market. And it has to make sense from a financial perspective so that you have the returns you need to make the money that you need to, right? And so you have that initial, I'm going to have whatever percentage stocks, whatever percentage bonds, and if you need cash. But then within stocks and bonds, you can't just buy one stock and one bond and have you need to diversify that portfolio. We generally think that means having US large and small company stocks, foreign large and small company stocks, emerging markets stocks, um, bonds should be in a diversified bond fund or probably funds. We use 3 or 4 different funds for most people. So yes, do I have the right allocation and am I diversified? Those are the questions you need to ask. And if not, take steps right now to fix that.
Okay, right. Is the contingent beneficiary of any of these instruments a child? Is that an issue?
Yep. If you have your 5-year-old twins as the contingent beneficiary on your IRA, that could be an issue if you die while they are still under the age of 18. So often, people don't have their wills, or people have had their wills done and didn't get instruction from their lawyer or their financial advisor, or didn't listen to that. Will have their spouse as their primary beneficiary and their kids as a contingent beneficiary. Having your minor children as a contingent beneficiary is likely to be an issue if you die prematurely. So if you have minor children as your contingent beneficiary and you don't have a will yet, call a lawyer and get your will done, and then update your accounts with the language that your lawyer thinks you should have. If you have a will and there's a trust in your will, there's trust language that you should have as a contingent beneficiary. Call your lawyer and ask him or her what that should be, and then update that document online or by calling the company. And then after they say it's done, have them send you proof that it's done. So you have a paper in your hands that says, oh, my primary beneficiary is my spouse, and my contingent beneficiary is the trustee of the trust under my last will, or whatever language your lawyer prefers. So sorry if I get a little rant on that, but it's amazing to me how often that is not taken care of. Having minor children as a contingent beneficiary is not a good idea.
So does that change when they turn 18 years old?
Well, it could, because, if they're 18, then they could legally take possession. Because here's the issue. If you're under 18, you can't take possession of something, right? So that means the court is going to have to supervise whatever's done. So instead of it being the child's aunt as a trustee, it's going to be the Bucks County Court, will take care of it until they're 18. And then they turn 18 and then, okay, here's a check for all those amounts. So if they're above 18, at least you don't have the court involved. But how many 18-year-olds would know what to do with an inheritance? Not many. There are some that would be pretty good, and they would know where to reach out to for help and know how to do the research. But there's a reason that we recommend trusts for people for their wills and their estate planning if they have minor or young-ish children, right? So in our wills, kids, like my sister's the trustee, kids would get money. She makes all the decisions for them. They could ask for stuff. They can, that will pay for whatever she thinks makes sense. But she, as an adult who's been an adult for a long time, will make those decisions. And then when the kids are 30, 35, and 40, they'll get parts, that where they'll get to make decisions.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Alrighty. So, do I have the right life, disability, and property and casualty insurance for my needs?
Yep. So if someone depends on your earning a living for their support, then you probably need life insurance unless you have a lot of assets relative to the spending. Same thing with disability insurance. If somebody is depending on you, you probably need disability insurance. Again, if you could have enough money that you don't need either of those, but that's a very small percentage of the population. Most people who are still working for a living probably need life and disability insurance. And then property and casualty insurance. So most people get enter the world of property and casualty insurance when they turn 16 or 17, get their driver's license, and they get a car. And then they get whatever is the cheapest amount, whatever is the lowest amount they legally are required to have. So they could pay the least amount because they don't have any money. It's a giant expenditure. Once you pass those early years and you get into your 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond, and you actually have things and your car and car insurance aren't like your biggest expense, then you should probably take a look at your property and casualty insurance again and have more reasonable coverage, right? Because you could get into an accident, if you cause an accident and you have the minimum amount of insurance, but you actually have a home and you have money in your checking account and you have investment accounts, they could, you could be sued for the damage you've done in the accident. And the plaintiff's lawyer can go after stuff in excess of your insurance policy. And now, there are limits to that, right? So that they can't take your home in most states. But it is a real issue, and it's one that I don't think most people really address. So once you have assets, right, you need to think about liability insurance not as, oh, what does the state require, but what is right for my circumstances, right? And you could talk to an agent or a broker about that. You could talk to a financial advisor about that, but don't just go with the minimum coverage. One thing, once you have a house, is you should have an umbrella liability policy. An umbrella liability policy will cover you for property and casualty amounts in excess of your underlying coverage limits. So you're going to have a limit for your house, you're going to have a limit for your car, and if you get sued in excess of that, your umbrella liability policy will cover that. Those are usually in like $1 million increments or $500,000 increments. And if you don't have young drivers, it's not that expensive, maybe a couple $100 a year per million. One of the other good things about that policy, in addition to that protection, is that whatever company writes that policy will make sure that your underlying coverage is good also, right? So that you'll have enough homeowners insurance and that you have enough auto insurance. Okay. And so it is a really good thing that is unfortunately overlooked. Look, most people just don't know,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And they go to their agent and they probably think, oh, the guy's trying to sell me something.
Yep.
Well, maybe he's trying to sell you something, but maybe he's trying to sell you something you should have.
Yeah.
So it's complicated,
Yeah.
right? No one wants to pay more for insurance than what they already pay.
Yep.
But liability management, through insurance, is a big part of most people's futures, or protecting their futures, once they are old enough to have things and own things. It's just part of life,
Yeah.
and it's an expense that is worth having.
Yep. Okay. Do I have the proper estate planning documents in place, and do my fiduciaries know where my documents are and what their jobs entail?
All right. So if you had a will done and the other ancillary documents like durable power of attorney and your advanced directive, you've had that done in the last few years, or you've looked at in the last few years, well, then hopefully you have everything in place. If you haven't had it done and your life has changed materially since the last time you had it done, take a look, see if the right people are still in the right spots, and take a look to see if it still makes sense. And if you aren't sure, call your lawyer and say, hey, we've had these changes. Does it make sense? Do I need to update? Some changes might be if you get divorced, or if you become estranged from a child, or if one of your fiduciaries has passed or you're no longer close with them. So the fiduciaries are your executor, your trustee, your guardian for any minor children, the person you name as your power of attorney, the person you name to make healthcare decisions. Those are all fiduciaries to you. So you name them in your documents, and then they have to put your interests first, and they will. I mean, they're most of the time. There's always exceptions, but you need to make sure that your documents are up to date and that your fiduciaries know their roles. You don't want to spring being the guardian of 5 kids on somebody, and that they know where your documents are. Like your executor is going to need to know where stuff is, or your power of attorney is going to need to know where stuff is, should the need arise for them to do the job you've asked them to.
Okay. All righty. Well, that was a nice checklist for the beginning of the year.
Well, thanks,
Help
Maddie.
guide some people. Absolutely.
It's it's
Yeah.
it's not comprehensive, but it's a real good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So those were the questions I just asked you. Those were questions that were actually in your article.
Okay,
So I am going to go in with some questions that I have about your article.
great.
Alrighty. So, what is the main argument against relying on predictions in the financial market?
We have the main argument is you have no idea if they're going to be right or not. And so you would have a better idea of what's going on in your life, and you could predict what's going on with much greater certainty than somebody saying, hey, I think the Dow's going to go up 10% this year.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it does, what does that mean in your life? It probably means nothing in your life.
Okay.
So take the predictions with a grain of salt.
Yep. All right. So, this is the question I'm actually interested in. So, in your opinion, why do financial experts continue to make predictions despite the acknowledged inaccuracy? What might be their motive?
All right. So couple great question, Maddie. So I don't know that they would acknowledge the inaccuracy. Somebody's going to go make predictions in the financial markets. Why do they want to do it? Because they want to get press coverage. They want people to think that they're smart and that they know more than other people. And that if they're an expert, then more people will buy their fund or read their book or watch their show or whatever it is. They're trying to get attention, just like everybody does, say, on social media. They're in a crowded world, and they want to be seen as the expert or the person who did this. And the reason they do that is because there are still headlines every day saying, oh, the guy who predicted the 98 long-term capital management crash says that now is a terrible time to be in stocks. That happened 25 years ago. The guy's probably been wrong 100 times since then, but they get that one time that they're right, and people will go to them over and over and over again, even though they could be like a litany of them wrong afterwards. Somebody compiled a real good one in I wish I could find it, but it had predictions after the 2008 crisis, 2008, 2009 great financial crisis. Um, they had like monthly snapshots of these people saying how bad it was to get in the market, what a mistake it was premature, the bear market didn't last long enough. And it was all well-known guys like Bill Gross from PIMCO. A lot of the perma bears were in that. But anyway, it's market went a long time before having a big downturn after the 2008, 2009. And it's, 8, 10 times higher than it was back then. So those pundits were wrong, horribly wrong. But they still get quoted because
Yep.
they were right one time. So we have a system where if you do get lucky one time, or you're just right one time, it doesn't matter if you're wrong the next 10 times. People will still say, oh, well, I'm going to ask him because he was right that time. That makes no logical sense. It makes no logical sense.
Yeah. All right. So, what are the potential drawbacks of relying solely on predictions for financial decision making?
Yeah, because it doesn't mean anything unless you're only worried about something being at a certain point in time in the future. So if you're guessing whether some bet on a futures market or stock futures or whatever the futures would be, I mean, there's no other reason that it would matter,
Yep.
right? Because I'm in my 50s. I'll be investing for a long time, hopefully. It doesn't matter if the market goes up 10% this year or not, or if it goes down 10%. It's not going to change anything. People need to be more concerned about making sure all of their ducks are in a row and their personal stuff is taken care of rather than trying to guess what's going to happen.
Right. So, what does this statement mean? A year is the short run in the context of financial planning.
Yep. Year goes by pretty fast for most people most of the time, right? Um, you'll have worked here 2 years next month,
Yeah.
right? That's pretty quick. It
Yeah.
goes by fast.
Yeah.
And a year in a lifetime, if life expectancy is in the 70s or 80s, 1 year is not a big amount, right? It's a 1 or 2% of most people's lives. So it's the short run.
Yeah. Okay. Do people often prioritize short-term market predictions over long-term financial planning? What could be the reason behind this behavior?
And the answer is yes, they do.
Okay.
And the reason is instant gratification. We want to know what's going to happen, if you feel like you know what's going on, it leads to more certainty. Whereas it's hard to plan long term, right? Like what is long term? What does that mean to you and what's involved in it? It's hard, like and things change and makes a lot of long term planning you know, not as relevant as it might have been. And it's harder. You need to do more thinking. You need to really prioritize, assess your situation, and figure out what you need to do. Whereas if like, hey, if I think the stock market is going to go up, I'm going to put some money in it. It's relatively short. It's more of like a bet than it is like a plan.
Yep.
It's like going to the casino. You just don't have those like jingling lights. Although Robinhood, you probably do have those jingling lights on it now.
Yeah. I feel like we've said that before a few times in past episodes.
Yep. A
That,
lot of this stuff isn't, a lot of this stuff is not new or different. It's
yeah.
it's a lot of the same principles
Yeah.
and just trying to get people's attention with them. That's all.
Yeah. All right. I am out of questions. Is there anything else you wanted to add to this episode?
No, thanks so much, Maddie.
Absolutely. For more information on Yardley Wealth Management or Yardley Estate Planning, you could visit our websites at yardleywealth.net and yardleyestate.net. You can also follow us on socials at Yardley Wealth Management. This podcast has been produced by Madison Demora and Mike Gary with technical and artistic help from Poe Productions.